Hello and welcome to the fifth episode of the Psychosocial Distancing Podcast. I'm Daniel Chadbourne, and joining me today is my co-host Thomas Brooks.
Hello.
And our special guest, first of I hope many, Natalia Assis.
Yes, hi Daniel, hi Thomas.
And so today, we've all been tasked. We've tasked to do a lot more research than we normally do, which is just like most classes I walk into. Usually tasked to do a lot more research for than I normally do. And today we're going to be getting into social perception. So we're going to be talking about how the social environment influences how we perceive others and how we perceive our social environment in a number of ways, building upon what we've already talked about with social cognition, aspects of the self, and attitudes. And so one of the big things, we're going to kind of introduce a little bit what we're going to be covering, but we're also going to be getting into kind of our topic of social perception. And instead of going into a lot of what the book does, we're going to be focusing predominantly on hair and hairstyles and how a number of personal attributes that have little to nothing to do about maybe who you are as a person influence how others might view you.
Very cool. So, when it comes to social perception, what do you think is the most prominent effect, or I guess the one thing that people rely on most when it comes to our social perception?
I didn't research for this.
Because I feel like what do people rely on most when it comes to social perception? Like my initial instinct is to go with things like threat.
Okay, so I thought that you would be asking about what are the characteristics that will enact.
Yeah, like to perceive someone as threatening.
Right. So like, for example, beard.
Yeah, so beard, we'll talk about beards.
Right.
Maybe heightened aggression.
Well, obviously racism, right? That has to be there because that's what we've been talking about all this time, right? How just by being Black, people are perceived as more dangerous. Lately, it has been shown more and more, right?
Kind of that stereotype of grabbing your purse when you're in a elevator with a Black man.
Right, correct. Yeah. That type of stuff. And that's interesting because there's a lot of people, I've been talking a lot about this with my brother and my sister, for example. Like there's a lot of people that they really consider themselves like super open-minded and all like accepting and not even racist. I'm not even talking about like racism itself, but just the knowledge. Like, so they think that they just know a bunch of things, but then they will say like, genetically speaking though, I don't know why people are racist. Like I've heard this. I don't know why people are racist because genetically speaking, y'all Black are so much better anyways, And I'm like, we don't want to go that way or the other way either, like we're cool here. Like, let's stay everybody here in the same lane. You know what I mean? So I find that interesting how some people will think that they just really open, but sometimes they
still hold on to some of the like knee-jerk social perceptions and schemas,
like holding your purse or this other one, stuff like this. So
yeah, and that's what we actually talked about last time. We were talking about implicit and explicit attitudes. We've kind of touched on schemas, which stereotypes are a type of schema. And so all of these concepts kind of tie in the same way, that if you don't have to explicitly condone a racist act, but if you're in a culture that is showing more types of people as villainous or criminal on television or in movies or in video games or whatever it may be, that can subtly influence you to, I'm not racist, but there's these things going on, or I feel this way around this person.
That is very interesting. Yes, which brings me to this post on Instagram that I saw the other day in Brazil about Brazilians, right? Because this perception or Black people or the movement, right, has spread it all around the world, right? It's not just here. And like, for example, even the hair movement, about it's being everywhere. Like, it's so strong back home too in Brazil, right? By the way, I'm from Brazil. Yes.
I was about to say, we probably should hear a little bit about you really quick.
Right, that is very true. Yes.
Yeah, why don't we, instead of, like, can we take a pause real quick and have Natalia?
Yeah, we'll rewind. And we let you introduce yourself.
Right.
What do you do? Where are you from?
Yes. So my name is Natalia Assis, and I am from Brazil. I am studying my PhD in educational psychology, and I like positive psychology as my research themes. Some of them, yes.
Most of them.
That is mostly what I like to do. Yes. And that's it, right?
No, I mean, unless you tell us kind of like what you do.
Yeah. Okay. So like I'm just gonna tell you my bio.
Yeah, tell us the bio.
The more people know about you, the less they will socially perceive you using their own biases.
Yes, that's awesome. Yes, that's great. That is a phrase of how do you call on stand-up, they have the joke that they always bring back. There is a name for it.
The reoccurring joke?
Yeah, but there is a
The running gag.
The running gag.
Yes, like this. Yes, that's a effect phrase, frase de efeito we say at home. Yes. Anyway, so I came to America 13 years ago, and I came to do my undergrad. I used to play volleyball. I got scholarships. I got recruited, came play volleyball. And that was my life. I didn't know anything outside of sports. It's so interesting because I see those things about groups and perceptions and all those things. I was like, those athletes that you see walking around, and it's just like this group of people that you already know. Every time you look at them, these people are in the team of something. Right. You know what I mean? I found that identity. I didn't perceive it like this until I wasn't anymore an athlete, And I talk about this because, like, for example, there's stereotypes on American movies, like in schools. I always think about this, like, they're outside, and then you have the grass, and then you have the specific different groups that are sitting out there and socializing by themselves. You know what I mean? So I was that one with the athletes, and then I wasn't anymore. And this actually made a difference. It's so interesting. Even like professors and stuff like this, some of them, they will like give students like more like slack. Some of them, it depends also in what the school is, and but for example, even because they have to travel, right, yeah. Anyways, there was too far away, but I was an athlete, and then I did my physical education degree, and I like to talk about this because I love how mixed up I'm all over the place, because I did my PE, then I did my MBA, and then now the PhD in educational psychology. So I feel like I learned about the mass, the body, and then the systems, and then the mind. That's how I connect those three things.
Right, yeah.
Yes. Pretty cool. Yes, and that's pretty much it.
It's like a true Renaissance woman. So it's the kind of like Renaissance man, Renaissance woman, a very well-rounded, eclectic, body of knowledge.
I love it. I mean, it's 11 years in school. So yeah.
Same.
That's us, right? Yes.
That's what we do. We never leave.
I talk about
it's the life.
Because like most of my friends at home, they're not like doing post undergrad, right? So I said, remember how much you learned in school? Like when you did your undergrad, remember like that, how much change there was in your mind? So multiply that by 3, because we did it 3 times, and it's just like, woo, it's all this knowledge that we gained throughout these years. That's pretty cool. I love it.
So where did we leave off? I don't remember.
Social perception.
Social perception.
Right. So then
I mean,
Yeah,
we
so
talked a little bit about like
you asked the
analyzing,
question.
like
You
looking
asked
at
the
threat. Then we kind of shifted
Right.
over into racism.
Yes, that also, and then I'll continue with the threat then.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and this is actually like not to give them too much attention, but this is something in like you find a lot in the involuntary celibate boards,
Mm-hmm.
is that they're not constantly talking about, but this gets floated a lot, that they hate that men are perceived as so violent or threatening, like when you're a stranger to a woman,
Right,
that women react like you're an automatic threat.
right.
And I think this is something that a previous, when we talked about ContraPoints, that was something that she had noted, was that before she transitioned, like she was very conscious of the fact of the way that she made strangers, women feel on the street when they were like alone on the street or alone in a room together.
Right. She noticed that.
And then when she switched
right?
to being female, like having female presenting,
Right.
that went away.
That is so interesting. I can see that because then they could see both sides in the contrast.
Mhm.
I remember what I was gonna say. I saw this post about stereotypes of Black women in Brazil on the media. That's why, because then you said something about media, yes, and then I saw it. It's like usually no exceptions. Okay, very rarely it gets out of this. So it's the maid, the sexual one, the aggressive, bigger, funny, loud one, and then the best friend of the white girl,
right,
that always helps her, that does everything for her, serves her basically, and so yes, that's it. I think that, well, those are the ones that I can remember, but you get what I'm saying. It's usually those very specific roles that the representativity that I have seen, for example, about those social perceptions that we're talking about.
Yeah, and those media roles essentially shape our social perception, shape our stereotypes about those groups. And so, I mean, the same thing too, that you know, if you have a villain in a movie, you know, going back to the involuntary celibate boards and things like that, if you have a villain in the movie, they're usually male.
Yeah. That's true.
You know, there are a lot of other qualities that go along with it. They're usually disfigured or ugly in some way.
Yeah.
And
right, something is wrong, right? A scar, something like that, right?
Yeah, and you know, it kind of plays into the it's called the what is beautiful is good stereotype. That so beauty equates goodness and positive qualities.
Did someone like the halo effect? Who studied this? Was it this you?
The halo effect?
Halo.
Well, I was going to save it, but we'll talk about the halo effect because that's our bias of the podcast.
Oh.
Yeah, so
we get out the bias of the podcast.
Got it early. Wells, 1907, Thorndike. It goes back, but it's a tendency for a person's positive or negative traits to spill over from one personality area to another in others' perceptions of them. It's also called good-looking people bias. But yeah, it's heavily tied to this idea that we focus on one trait, we make associations about that one trait, and that bleeds over into others.
Right. That's so interesting because
that's kind of something that I noticed, like you were talking about with the Black women media representations and villains. Like that's kind of what the gay men community deal with a lot, is that it's often portrayed as the gay best friend or the super villain who's really campy. Those are usually the two pigeonholes you get. So you're either the gay best friend who helps the straight white girl like deal with her life, or you're the drag queen.
Right. The slave. The slave is the another one.
Yeah.
Of the Black woman. That was the one that I was missing because yes, of course, it's always there, right? But it's not like that one is like historically limited for you. You can put there, right? So.
Yeah, and it's even in how it's framed. I was looking at an article, I think it was yesterday. They're talking about how because of some recent event, Black Lives Matter protests in Portland or Seattle had exploded again on the streets. And the comments in this particular article were things like, no, they've been going strong for the last nearly 60 days. They have not just recently re-exploded. they have been consistently
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Yes.
no,
exploding.
you're
Right.
re-paying attention to it.
Right. It's just that you've decided to ignore it to talk about other things. But that again
Right.
creates this social perception that this is maybe a flash in the pan thing, that this is similar to maybe some other short-lived protests. But also what is exposed, even your social perception of whether you view the protests as predominantly peaceful or violent
Right.
is
Mhm.
determined drastically by what media you're consuming.
Correct.
This kind of came up too, talking about Black women. They were reference. I was looking at some comparison headlines because we've had a lot of primaries lately,
Uh-huh.
and so a lot of members of the Democrat squad have been winning their primaries, but a lot of the media headlines have been they've been surviving, but they're winning by like thousands of points.
Like they're hanging
What is it?
there.
They're hanging in there despite the fact that they've got like over 50% of the vote.
Omar won hers, I think, yesterday, and it was that it was like this embattled race. She won by like 10 plus points,
Yeah,
like 60-40, like
That does not
a
sound like-
landslide. Yeah.
so that social perception kind of goes into the fact that maybe these congresswomen are just a phase and that they're
Right.
going to pass, and they're kind of projecting that in their writing.
And again, part of it, I mean, this can be very explicit. This can be an explicit decision made by a news station or made by a reporter. But when we get into things like social perception, some of this might not even be. It may be just the way that they're perceiving it, or they're wording it, the words that they decide to use, which gets kind of almost muddies the water on how intentional some of this stuff is, or how intentional certain aspects of the news coverage. I mean, we just know that they're not going to be broadcasting the peaceful protest as much as any aggressive or criminal activity that's happening, because the peaceful protest doesn't sell. It's not exciting. It's not getting people to cling to their television or click.
And I mean, are you going to click on an article that says that AOC is struggling to win her primary because you're concerned about her?
Correct.
Or are you going to click on it if, like, oh, she won handedly? Like,
Yes.
the headline
You're
is all
like-
you need.
You're like, yeah, I knew it. So yeah, that
You
makes
keep
total
scrolling.
sense. Yes.
But if she's struggling, you got to go, why?
Right. Yes, that's the reason of the how do you call dramatic headlines,
Mhm.
right? Dramatic headlines.
Mhm.
Yeah, right. Interesting.
Yeah. So, social perception in a large view.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess I'll give a example of kind of a more minute view. So I was interested in looking at zero acquaintance judgments, which is basically the idea of what kind of social perceptions you have first viewing someone without any knowledge of them whatsoever, because knowledge of someone can alter that social perception quite a bit.
And those first impressions take about what, like it's like 500 milliseconds.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Good point.
And so I was really curious because there's a lot of research done on like how people feel about getting salacious or nude pictures on dating apps,
Right.
just in general, and kind of like how you feel about people who send those kinds of pictures. But I was more interested in is what are those subtle zero acquaintance biases that you're making about that person just based on what the visual information you're getting, not necessarily the context. And so I had participants look at 48 pictures of genitals in a row, both vulvas and penises of differing lengths, girths, different levels of labia, different sizes of clitorises, different levels of pubic hair. And I found that generally the more quote unquote normal, so average, is usually perceived as best.
Right.
But for like something like labias, for example, I looked at like no labia visualization versus some versus a whole lot. And the sum is actually preferred, and people ascribe like more agreeableness and conscientiousness and more attractive to some rather than none. But like for something like when you control for like the amount of clitoris that's visible. If there's a whole lot of clitoris visible, you start getting things like outgoing and high sex drive and assertive and more dominant and stuff like that, as opposed to very little visibility. Penis length, of course, the longer the penis, the more sexually active and pleasurable and sex-centric. But if you have a normal or average size, then it was seen more as agreeable, more attractive, stuff like that. So hitting that middle ground right there was more ideal. But you started getting like really interesting swings the further out you got from what was perceived as prototypical. And I didn't have exact measurements for these penises, but they were aesthetically very similar in the pictures. But just for listeners at home, average is 5.5 inches. So take that with what you will. It's not 7 inches. It's not 6 inches. It's 5.5.
Yeah, again, social perception of and stereotyping about what a lot of things are, heavily influenced by the media that you watch.
The media. Very few people have above 7 inches.
Yes.
So yeah, and so basically, how does this apply to everything that we've been talking about and we will be talking about for the rest of this episode? Is that this is something that has nothing to do with your personality. It has nothing to do with really any other trait besides that. If we're talking about hair, what your hairstyle is, if you have a beard, if your hair is long or short, but we attribute so many things to it because of those associations.
Yes. So I guess I will kick that off.
Yeah.
We have surprisingly the least amount of research right now. I was interested. Do it? Go ahead.
I was going to say, when it comes to, I think we're all kind of in that boat, is that we went into this thinking there'd be a whole lot more done on it. Mine kind of went in a different direction too. Like I found a lot of research, but it wasn't always what I was looking for.
So since I'm a dude with long hair, you can't tell because this is a podcast. It's gotten quite luscious.
Yes.
I was interested in kind of what are the social perceptions around long hair, and I kind of figured there would be a lot of research on it, especially from like the 60s and the 70s, from like the hippie movement. I figured they would be really interested in that. But I found very little actual research done on long hair.
I would think that, yeah.
On dudes specifically.
Okay.
Yeah. So the earliest work that was done was from Larson and White in 1974. And they pretty much found that men with longer hair were perceived as more independent and less conforming, which kind of makes sense with the 70s. And then following up from that, Pantzer and Mendel, 1978, found that people perceive men with long hair to be less educated, but also that they were more open-minded, younger looking, more outgoing, and more reckless than their short hair counterparts. And then nothing for 2 decades until 2002 with Hirschman, who found that men with longer hair were more youthful, feminine, more pleasure-seeking, more outspoken, and immoral. And I was like, oh, dangerous. And then a little bit later on, in 2011, in a thesis by Connors, they found that men with longer hair were perceived as less intelligent and attractive. But one of the things I had a question about with this study is that because it's a thesis, I got to see their materials. And so the way they designed the study was they had 3 different models who were okay. They all had short hair, and then they had 2 wigs that were placed on top of them. So they had a short hair wig and then a longer hair wig. And both of those wigs, I swear, were bought at Dollar General. They were terrible. Like, they looked bad. Like, they had bangs and they had like red and blonde highlights on brown hair. And I was like, what? You couldn't have like gotten a better way. Like, of course people are going to think they're less intelligent and attractive because they're wearing that stupid wig. Like, it was very clockable.
If,
So
if I'm a participant, all I'm thinking is this just what the person looks like in their day-to-day? Because I don't want anything to do with them.
Yeah, no, you pick up that wing and it's like, no, thank you. So overall, I mean, with the past, like, I don't know, 25 years, no, I guess it'd be 45 years of research, not a lot has been done, which I've kind of found surprising. I kind of figured there'd be more in like the 60s and 70s, and maybe a little bit more right now, since there's kind of been a resurgence of dudes with long hair. Because there's been a lot of Facebook groups and like different long hair communities for men, like teaching men how to take care of long hair, what kind of products to use.
Wow, yeah.
Like, because like, I'm gonna be honest, when I go to anime conventions and I see dudes with long hair, I'm like, whoa, I'm a professional hair care person. I had no idea.
So it's nowadays it's easier to find some more stuff
for men specifically?
Specific for men, yes.
Yeah,
okay,
so there's 2 Facebook groups that are the most popular. They have more than 3,000 members. One of them is Serious Hair Guys, and the other one is called Mannered Manes, which I loved. And then there's also a Instagram group called Man Buns and Manes, which has over 8,000 followers right now. And so there is kind of like a new little internet subculture identity group developing of dudes who grow out their hair.
Right.
Which I kind of like, thousands of people in these groups is, you know, expected, but I kind of figured it'd be a little bit more since we've kind of seen the popularity of like man buns rise over the last 10 years. But I guess right now it's the quarantine head buzz that is more popular at the moment.
Right.
Yeah, and two, whether or not that these are all, you know, again, we're talking about out of 300 million, or I guess 150 million Americans, if we're about 50-50, that how many are growing their hair out. And that, again, if we're still dealing with, and this is like some of the stuff that we'll see in kind of our other 2 hair-oriented topics, that it may not be so much as younger people deciding to do this, but whether or not their bosses are okay with it. And again, that they're still seeing, you know, who are you seeing on television? Are your parents allowing you to grow your hair out when you're younger?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, I haven't got as much negative feedback on my hair as I thought I would when I was growing it out. Because I came from, like, you know, a really conservative household, and they all think I'm a dirty commie hippie. But, like, especially when I go to, like, well, I guess in classes with students love it. I've had people say I have Jason Momoa hair, and I'm about that. And then I also get, like, lots of positive stares at, like, Renaissance fairs. Like, everybody stares at my hair.
Where it's acceptable.
Oh yeah, very, like, I am peak Renaissance fair with this hair.
Great.
But yeah, no, it's either no comment, or your hair is really pretty, or just open mouth gape, like, take me away, Prince.
Do you think that changed according to how old the people around you are? Hold on. Yeah.
I mean, maybe, yeah, because, like, at home, like, it's mostly, like, older people, like, people who grew up in the 60s and the 70s and became adults that time, so they're more negative, but people nowadays don't really care.
I can see that happening.
Yeah, I think the only negative comment is they're like, you live in Texas, like, that hair's got to be so hot in the summer. And I'm like, yeah, I'm dying right now. I just shaved off one of our mutual friends' hair because he grew it out. Not quite as long as mine yet, but he finally, like, bit the bullet, and I buzz cutted him and gave him a quarantine haircut because he could not handle the length anymore.
Yeah, mine's a little long, and it's getting to be a little much, and the weather's much better here.
So yeah, overall, long hair on dudes seems like a positive thing. You might get some unintelligent, unattractive perceptions if it looks like a hideous wig, But overall, if you're going for a more pleasure-seeking, outgoing, rebellious, anti-authoritarian look, like, it's a pretty good look to go with.
Right.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting too, because this, I guess, can segue into the next of the three hair topics, is that whether or not this acceptability may come from the fact that a white guy with long hair isn't nearly as, I don't know, maybe off-putting. I mean, you know, our traditional view of Jesus as a white guy with long hair.
Right. I have been called Jesus.
Right.
And
I'm sure.
And if you compare it with you know, the reverse, so a woman with really short hair, or if we're talking about a diverging from kind of a norm hairstyle amongst non-white, non-male individuals, you know, how would that be seen? And, you know, again, if there's not a ton of research on, I think, in the same way of like short hair in women. I did come across some on both beardedness and long hair in women, and that long hair in women is typically seen as more positive.
I will say one of my favorite YouTube genres right now is vlogs of women with long hair shaving off their hair into a buzz cut.
Oh, wow.
Because they're super dramatic and like crying and like nervous and scared, like leading up to it, and then they do that first one and they're like,
ooh, freedom.
She's like, oh no, and then it's like kid in the playground, and then at the very end she's like, oh, this was wonderful, this is the best thing for me, I feel so much better, why didn't I do this before? Like every time.
So they decide to cut it, but then they're still crying. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they're still crying at the beginning, and then like you just watch their just like, it's like watching therapy.
Right.
Like, shaving your head is like the most therapeutic thing, I'm utterly convinced of right now, for women.
That's hilarious. Yes. Yeah. I don't know. I talk about how I'm very attached to the hair idea, and it would take a couple of years, I would think, for me to decide to shave my head and be like, oh, it's cool. Because of the social pressure, right? Because of dealing with those things. I think and I've always said this, I'm like my sister, she's 9 years younger than me. So she's a different generation. I feel like her generation is way more free in that sense of getting, distancing themselves from those social expectations that still keep me kind of following the deal with the hair. Even though, as I'm going to talk about,
I was about to say,
been changing lately. So,
yeah, you're being a little rebel right now.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah, I couldn't shave my head.
Right.
And it's not because I don't think that I'd be okay with it. It's that, and I mentioned this to someone talking about the quarantine haircut. It's that after growing up 30 plus years in southern Louisiana, a lot of that time in the backwoods, there's a lot of associations with large bearded guys with shaved heads in the backwoods of Louisiana, and they're the kind of people who march. They're the kind of people who march with tiki torches.
Oh my goodness!
And again, that social perception.
That is wow.
I wouldn't want to be seen as a skinhead.
Right.
And again, there's nothing wrong if you want to shave your head. And I shouldn't be ashamed of it, but I would have this almost self kind of perception view that is heavily influenced by, you know, those aspects of, you know, the communities in which I grew up in.
And how you want to be perceived, right?
Right.
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah, so tell us about your rebellious adventure.
Oh, yeah, so we'll talk about hair. I love this.
So I guess start us off, like, what were you doing beforehand and what are you doing now?
Right, so, well, I'm from Brazil, and I'm going natural. I have decided that I'm going to, decided that I'm going to stop straightening my hair. That's what this means for curly girls or girls with kinky and coily hair. And this has been like this huge movement, right? This is the natural hair movement, and it has been like focusing and encouraging these women to stop putting that very unhealthy straightener, relaxer in your head. You know, I was watching this documentary. It's called The Good Hair from Chris Rock, and he goes around the country and talking about hair and seeing, because his little girl asked him, she came crying from school and said, I don't have good hair. So he went and started asking around what is good hair. But anyways, in the relaxer, this thing that they have in there, they had a Coke cans inside of it. 1 hour, it just took out the paint, so it's like transparent. And then the second hour, or like it's almost transparent. The second hour is transparent, and the fourth hour, it's melted. It freaking melted Coke can. Yes, and then that's why it's so, like, whenever people say it's just hair, you know, why is it such a big deal around hair? So this social perception, and why is it that people are complaining? But this is very interesting, because now that I'm going natural, right? Because I had the curls, but I had to straighten it, and this really literally burned my head, literally. And I find out that a lot of people don't know that now that I know, right? I mean, if you're from the Black community, you would know because you grew up around it. But besides that, you just really have no idea about it.
And just to be specific, straightener is a chemical product.
Right, a relaxer, correct. I guess that's would be the best. Because the straightener, not just the heat, right? Which goes in combination with that, then you have all the heat damage. But it's important to mention that how, without even perceiving it, well, how this is one of society's expectations, you know, on women that have curly hair. It has been for so many years. And that's why in the late, I don't know, I would say more than like the last decades, there is this natural hair movement, even though it walks slowly. And at some points, right? Like, for example, it's still, I find it so interesting that it's still the afro, or how can it be, coily hair, or I don't know how in Brazil we call it black, but it's like with the English word, you know, like black, it's what we call the afro style hair. I guess that's how it's called here in America. And it's not seen as professional. Right. It's really not considered professional, but then that's just my hair. So it's very interesting how a lot of people still do not put those things together, you know. It's like, what, you burn your head? No, why would you do that? I'm like, because if I go to work, I can be fired. For example, there is they ruled that companies can and are allowed to ban dreadlocks, for example, you know, which is one of the hair characteristics and identity of the, or I want to say Black community, which I'm Brazilian, but I'm Black and people don't know that. But like there's Black Latinos and I'm Black there and I'm Black here, but people don't really think a lot about that because I'm my first language is not English. That's another very interesting thing, right? Like, what, you're Black? No, you're Latina. I'm like, no, I'm both. Like I've been, I'm part of the movement, you know. Anyway, so I find those things very interesting. How there is this expectation that you have this straight hair without even realizing it, because it's like, no, be who you are, like self-love and find yourself and accept yourself, and then you accept yourself and you go to work. And you have stares and you have people like just kind of like, making comments such as, you should smooth it out a little bit, maybe. You know, like this is real stuff that people have said, you know. So, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was about to say, kind of building off of Daniel's comment about like white dude with long hair can be anti-authoritarian.
Right.
One of the things in American history with the Black Panther movement, they were very much all about the natural hair, and they all had afros just about. And so afros here specifically are seen as anti-authoritarian and revolutionary.
Right.
And it scares old white people.
Right. Which is so, yes, right. It's so interesting because over there was already a movement of like, it's just my hair. Right, because there is this expectation of the straight hair. It's a big deal, y'all. Like, it's being part of my life every single day since I was a kid, and I remember this so much. And it's so interesting because there is a movie. It's called something about the hair. I forgot, but my friend saw this movie. One of my best friends since we were like really little, and she talked to me like nowadays, and I'm 33 now. Like I'm gonna say less than 10 years ago, she said, "Oh, amiga, I watched that movie, and now I understand everything you went through, and I remember how because everybody's like, wow, why do you spend so much time on your hair?" And I'm like, well, let me not spend time on my hair and see if you can accept how my real hair, my natural hair is, you know? And that's why just like going natural, let's put it like that, is a mini revolution in itself, you know, because of all of those perceptions of the curly or coily hair. Yeah.
And the prototype essentially is white.
Right. No, that's exactly.
It's straight. Yeah.
Correct, Daniel. Right, because that's one of the things that I was going to mention, that if you nobody really thinks about it, but like 1/4 of the products only in like big stores are for actual curly or black hair.
Oh yeah,
like
it's a tiny little section.
Yeah, like a tiny little. Everything else is for straight hair. So that's why you have been having like all this growing community of like, they call the CGM, like the curly girl method. It's a huge movement on the internet that they have groups and tips and people crying there because no, look at the curl of my girl, and they post pictures and it's so wonderful. There's like some really pretty stories because people haven't seen this, right? They have not, people that have coily or curly hair in a family that people have straight hair, they always being like shamed, and yeah, the hair was never really accepted, right? So it's that, let me accept what is coming out of my hair, of my head, you know. I shouldn't have to chemically alter what comes out of my head because with something that burns me, right? Just so I can fulfill this societal pressure for having straight hair, right? I think that it's very strong on me. So now, right now, at this moment, I'm going through this, and it's way more than just hair, right? Because that's what I was saying. Sometimes, like the federal court ruled, once ruled it's legal for employers to ban dreadlocks, right? For example, what I'm doing is I have braids right now, long braids. They are half black, half white. And I decided that I'm going to play with my hair. I decided that I'm going to change colors with the long braids. And I decided that I'm going to accept this. And it's so interesting because I never thought I was going to braid my hair. I did when I was a kid. And I never thought that I just thought I was going to continue to follow that path of conforming until I had one conversation with friends, and obviously because of everything that has happened lately, and like, of course there is COVID, right? Because everybody's kind of more at home, having more time to reflect. Not that, yeah, we are too, a little bit more at home, because even us, they're always studying.
Right.
We would go like to the lab or be, you know, have other things to be busy. Exactly, about, correct. So all those things have really like influenced me and changed me. So now I have these long braids, and I'm going to continue to play with braids. But it's so interesting because I already seen some people kind of like the white high level leaders, for example, they're kind of like, whoa, like today was eye-catching.
Yes.
The one that I got.
Yes, she was eye-catching.
That was the adjective used to describe my braids today in a meeting on the computer, right? So those things are, and I mean, it's not a bad thing, right? Some people might think, so what? Eye-catching is great, right? But it's not the same. It's a hesitant eye-catching.
I was, when he opened his mouth, I was very worried.
It's kind of like a borderline, or I mean, maybe not a borderline in this case, microaggression. This idea of, you know, the person saying it may not realize, but again, based on their perception of what they see as normal, or
you have deviated from the norm, Natalia.
Correct, and that's what I'm doing. I'm a rebel now. And that's the thing, and that's how whenever people say, "Oh, but it's just hair. What's the big deal?" And it's not. You see, it's like the perception that Daniel was talking about. That if he shaves his head, he's going to be perceived as something else than what he actually is. And it's the same thing with the black hair, right? And I'm like super professional for people that like don't know me. I love the professional settings and the leadership settings and all those things. And in that world mainly because you have even less black women, it's obviously not celebrated or understood, this hair, right? It's another thing.
Eye-catching.
It's eye-catching though, and I don't mind being eye-catching, don't get me wrong. I've got like you're so eccentric.
Oh.
I'm like, okay, thank you. Anyways, but then, for example, another thing that I think about is I have to go for half an hour from here to go get hair products for me. If I really want to get specific hair products, I cannot just go to Walmart and buy it simple. You know, it's very interesting to see those things and think about them and how they're so subtle. They're so subtle that like you don't think about it. Nobody does, right? Like even like something as like swimming classes, something as simple as swimming classes. Black girls, either they won't go because the hair, and then there is this thing about that you have to have straightener and then you relax it, right? Chemically alter it and then you straighten it with the hot comb, whatever you call it, right? And then you can get wet. That's one of the things that I hated the rain. I hated rain. My whole life I hated rain because my hair had to be like completely straight as possible, and that's why I never grew. I never like had haircuts because I mean it's breaking.
Yeah, the chemical would cause it to break.
Correct, right. So anyways, I think that it's important that I think I'm glad that I'm having the chance to discuss those things. And this is one of the things that I hope that one day and that's what I consider myself. I consider myself one of those people that are going to contribute to this change because I am where I am and doing what I'm doing, right? And bringing in this, I guess, African rooted hairdos, I guess you could say, to the mainstream or to those positions, right? That people usually are not used to it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's that representation.
I think so, yes. And it's so interesting because it's not even like I'm like, I want this to be a revolution. I don't necessarily, it's just me chilling. You know what I mean? But it seems even like because it is a revolution because it's against the norms, right? I find it very, very interesting how a lot of people are so not aware of this whole behind the scenes of the coily and kinky hair community.
I think I watched that Chris Rock documentary a long time ago, and I think that's what originally cued me in.
Right.
And then also when I was growing out my hair, I did go to those curly hair groups because I was like, who knows about how to take care of curly hair? Yeah. Black women do.
Yes.
So I'm gonna go get my tips from them.
That is true. That is so true. And it's like I have these braids, long braids, guys, and I've never worn these, and it's like jumbo braids for my black girls that understand the sizes. And I did it myself, but I knew I was gonna be able to do it because I've been doing hair for 33 years. I mean, no, just kidding, because I'm 33, so like whenever I'd be able, yes, 30 years I would say. So I'm doing hair for 30 years. I'm expert. I have more than 10,000 hours of deliberate press. Yes, then I think that it's good for Daniel to go now, right?
Oh, I mean, if Daniel has some questions.
Or do you guys have anything to add, right? Yes, Daniel, actually, I would like to know your opinion. What do you think? Have you heard about it? And if you did, is it just because you're in the academic world, or how do you feel about this?
Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't for, I think, just my own, awareness of some of these subcultures and groups, I probably wouldn't have.
Right? So it's one of the things that we pay attention to, those differentiations, right?
Yeah, it was definitely not something I grew up with, that I had any experience with. But like, it makes me think of all of the stereotypes that come with, oh, my wife's taking so much time in the bathroom doing this. I'm like, well,
Right.
it's because it's expected.
Yes.
They
And
wouldn't,
if we did
you
that,
you wouldn't do it if there wasn't some potential repercussion, because
that's very correct. And then if that's what I'm saying, that people don't put those two things together, right? Like the expectation, and then also the expectation that we don't do anything because you should love yourself how you are. But then if I go out how I am, you are staring at me and making comments too. So it's like I'm here held in the middle, having to choose one side, right? Yes.
Yeah, and I would think for like people who may not still be able to kind of wrap their brain around it,
Right.
that even things like wearing makeup, or I think there's a difference in, like, we'll get into beardedness. There's a big difference too in a trimmed beard versus kind of a wild beard. Do I want to be the next ZZ Top, or do I want, occasionally it gets a little long and I'm like, I'm going to shave it down a little bit.
Yeah. Or like these two for the makeup, for example, it's like wearing heels. Some companies literally, they still have in their rules that girls or women have to wear heels.
Yes.
Have to. And that is something that baffles me, because that hurts.
Can't wear pants.
Yes.
Have to wear a dress or a skirt. Like, it's, yeah.
It baffles me that nowadays we still have people that have the nerve to tell other people that level of detail how they have to live. It's like, wait, what? You're making me wear something that hurts. It's not just like a social rule, like that it's not damaging. It's like really, it's absurd for me. I know that it sounds like it's not just hair. That's the point, right?
I did have a question. If you could elaborate a little bit more, you said earlier that the curly hair movement is across borders, and just kind of, I know we've talked a little bit about like the experiences of having curly hair in America versus Brazil, and how racism tends to rear its head in different ways. If you could expand on that.
Yes, definitely. I love this because it's interesting, because now, like I have mentioned a little bit, that here in America, a lot of people don't consider me black just because I'm light skinned. Like I'm black, but I'm light skinned black, and I'm Latina, and I have an accent, right? So most people are not just gonna assume I'm black. Even black people say, "No, you're not. Let me touch your roots." And like I've had that, right, to prove that I am black because I have the black hair or something. I did. I passed the test. So. And I was saying, my sister already wears her afro hair, black, whatever, how you call it, for like 5 years now. And this hair movement is very strong in Brazil because we are so mixed. As a culture, they're so mixed, we have a lot of curly hair, because most people have that influence somewhere in their lineage. But let's put it like that, right?
As opposed to segregated America.
That's opposed to segregation here. It's so interesting. I was talking to my brother yesterday, and I was telling him about those things, because what's something that's so interesting that I heard, and I saw this and I found on Instagram lately. It's like the Afro-Latino movement. But then you have some posts talking about how some pure blacks, quotation marks, how they are, I guess they're pure. I don't know what they're saying. They're talking about how, you're not part of the movement. Of course, it's not everybody, but you have those radical ones that they're saying, you're not black, like you're not part of the movement. And I'm like, there was slavery everywhere. So yes, there is black people in other places too. But again, in Brazil, people are more mixed. And I was really shocked about how like some people want to just exclude the black Latinos, and I'm like, we're black, like what are you talking about? That doesn't even make a lot of sense in my head.
It might be something to come back to when we get into talking about things like prejudice, that especially if you're part of a group that has been segregated to an extent for so long, it may be very difficult to say like these people are also kind of in with us. But it might be hard to kind of, at least for some people, to bring other people in, because for so long you've been forced to be on your own.
Right, correct. And that's the interesting part, right? In Brazil, we are way more desegregated, but it's still there is the stereotypes. There's still the, the financial, social financial situation is still differs, by the darker you get, the probability of you being poor is higher. But as I was saying, this movement of the going natural is huge in Brazil too, because of this. Like I'm saying, we are all mixed. Most of us have some curls or some waves or some type of kinky and coil, and it's very similar in the sense of work. Professionalism, like for example, it's so interesting, it comes so natural. My sister made a comment because she, like I said, she has this long afro style hair, and she said, I'm going to take advantage that we're in quarantine so I can wear braids. Obviously she didn't say this paused, right? But I'm just like, so you can understand how charged this comment is, right? I'm just, because I'm at home, I'm gonna wear braids. So that's how it shows how it's not well accepted, because just naturally she avoids doing that whenever life is normal. Or I think that, for example, I grew up with being bullied because of my hair, for sure. My mom straightened my hair when I was 6 the first time. So it's not like I even have seen my hair or know how my hair looks, because your hair changes anyways, right? After you grow. So this is one of the other thing of the hair movement, just here in home. It's that we don't know our hair, and it's like we get to know our real hair, our texture. It's something about like you knowing the hair and the hair coming to you type of feeling, like you finally know your hair, because you never know, because you straightened it for so long. And I think that it's very similar, Thomas, to answer your question, very similar in the sense of the pressure. However, we have way more shades and types of mixtures of hairs, which is different here. For example, I was talking about that to my brother. Here, whenever you see like a mixed person, like mix is kind of like a race, like mix, right? It's really interesting, because back home you can't even really say that. Of course, you have parents that are multi-race and all those things, but like it's not a thing that you say mix, and you can't really spot it so easily like here, because here it's usually like very white or very black couple, and then the kid is like coffee and milk, right? It's like a mix, like you straight up see the kid, it's me, and I think they're
and we still kind of do that. President Obama is our first black president,
right,
who has a white mother, and but that again kind of gets into this intersectionality between like identity and ethnic background. I think we're going to be starting to see that a lot now with some of the discussions that are being had with Kamala Harris, who is lighter skin, and thus is already creating this sort of discussion and talking points about how white do we consider her versus
where's the threshold, right? Yes, and I what I can to conclude also, like one of the things that I can say is that I did grow up with that pressure, and I'm telling you, like nowadays, thankful to this movement, we can talk about this so openly, because this was not something that was even like allowed in the social environment as one topic, right? And I say this like I never talked about those things, and now I cannot talk about anything else, because it's just like this awakening on me, and this whole accepting myself, it's very interesting. Regardless of what the perception is going to be in the outside. So I'm at the point right now that I'm like, if you don't like this, I don't want to be here, thank you very much, I'm about to go. Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, in a way, it kind of transitions a little bit, because a lot of the research that looks at beardedness kind of looks at not just how other people perceive you, but also how you perceive yourself with that, and how, again, like choices that we make in terms of long hair or different hairstyles or facial hair, whatever it may be.
If it changed our behavior.
It's possible. I mean, when we think about sense of self and self-schema and how conformity, which is our next chapter, how we conform to certain pressures based on whether or not we might meet certain prototypes ourselves, but also, you know, how we think about ourselves kind of ties into that with the world. I mean, I think about my own understanding of something like masculinity. I'm a very bearded masculine guy, but my perception of masculinity is very different than maybe someone else's. But seeing me with a beard, they're gonna code me as more masculine. I mean, to be honest, I haven't seen my chin since high school. That even when I've shaved, this has never come off completely. But it was also, you know, again, kind of a decision of, you know, can I, and I've had jobs and it's been far more accepting for me to have a beard than I think it has been any other thing that we've talked about.
Yes.
But there are jobs that are very restricting with that, and there are
beard too, you think?
Yes, I learned a little bit. You could not have a beard if you worked at Disney World until 2012.
Wow.
And the reason they gave in pre-2000, so in the year 2000, you could have a mustache, a well-trimmed mustache. No beard, no goatee. You could not work at Disney World. Yeah. Well, and the reason they gave when asked about it is it says that feedback they had gotten from parents and that they wanted to set a positive role model for children. And just
that is why.
Again, think about you think about the question, and it goes back to kind of what we're talking about, these kind of aggression and villains have beards and things like that we have these kind of perceptions of what someone who is bearded is like. But yeah, in 2012 they allowed it. They said, all right, you can have a well manicured beard. Like it has to be, like, it can't just be wild, and it has to be a full, like, if you cannot grow, you know, if your beard's a little patchy, you just need a shave.
No corona beard.
No, you have to have a beard. I did learn that there are still some restrictions. The Universal Studios and Walt Disney World, at least I'm assuming, I was reading the Universal Studios one, no extreme sideburns.
Whoa.
And so,
yeah,
like having them all the way, like mutton chops, where they're all the way down to your chin.
To your chin, yes, correct.
I came really close to doing that one year, just to see what would happen.
The elves, no?
The elves?
Yes, like in Disney World.
Oh, the dwarves?
Yes, dwarves.
But they're all in costume.
Right.
I think the thing that I find wild about beards is that they are so situated in time. Because like you go back like maybe even 100 years and like it was expected to have a beard.
Right.
Like you wouldn't.
That's a very good point. I can see that.
You had to have one. You had to. If you couldn't have the beard, you had to do the mutton chops. If you couldn't do that, you had to have the mustache.
That's true. When you think about, like, you know, old school pictures and images in my mind, they always have you know, it's so interesting to my brother. He gets a ruler to do his beard. Like and there's another thing for another podcast about this pressure of beauty in Brazil. That it's very strong, right? Very strong. That's why people are like, oh, all Brazilians are pretty. And imagine with the pressure that goes with that, behind that, right? But anyway, so he gets a ruler and he measures this and does it like super perfect. And he said that once he thought about doing the laser out when he was younger. And he's like, I'm so glad I didn't do this, like remove the hair permanently.
Oh, yeah.
Thought about that, and he said, I'm so glad I didn't, because now he had like this full beard. And another thing that I wanted to bring up, and maybe Daniel, to know from you if you have read about that too, because you know how there's some people that cannot grow beards. Like they literally, like, there is a lot of people that just have like a clean baby face, I guess, right?
I've had some friends over the years who could not grow facial hair to save their lives, and then some who could, but it was never like a full beard. It was a little, maybe a little patchier, or Yeah, and it's interesting because it is a relatively, I don't want to say relatively new thing, like that we're kind of maybe talking about beardedness.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is definitely cultural. It changes. Different cultures have very different views of it. Some cultures view it very differently than others, and it changes over time, especially if we're talking about Western culture. It changes pretty drastically over time. You know, in the 60s and 70s, with the hippie movement, we see drastic social differences, and then that kind of goes away. That the after the 60s and the 70s, there was kind of a push of non-beardedness. It's kind of back into the fold. I think I don't want to speculate too much, but I think we're getting into a point where maybe, I mean, especially if we're looking at like millennials, Zoomers, and whatnot, that they don't care as much about it. If you want to, great. If you don't, great. You know, whatever. Just there's more important things to worry about. And that might be what we're seeing, but it'd be interesting to tell in the next 20 years. But also that's tied to like the people around us. If you grew up with your father's always clean shaven, you might not view a beard as something that's, you know, for you. In the same way that the hair, you know, your mom straightening your hair at age 6. This is how I'm supposed to look.
But sometimes you don't even question, right? I think
right.
Just go with the flow, and you're not even questioning. Yes, and I think that's a moment for me of a lot of questioning. Yeah.
So there's, from the evolutionary perspective, and there's this article, this kind of cultural focus on beards. There was this quote that I came across, and it's the most like biological description of beards I've ever seen. The beard is a strikingly sexual dimorphic, androgen-dependent secondary sexual trait in humans.
Oh, wow.
That it's in part dependent on androgen, you know, the kind of male component, or flip of estrogen. It's tied, I would say it's tied in part to testosterone, but we also know that like having too much testosterone can lead to hair loss.
Right.
So, and there's a lot of the research that looks at beards that also looks at baldness as perception.
Testosterone, like overdose thing. Interesting.
Yeah, so most of the research tends to focus on this Dixon and Vasey. This 2012 article is one of the more recent ones. And what they found is that they looked at both European descendant New Zealanders and Polynesians from Samoa, and found both groups tended to view individuals with beards as being more related to age-related, so being older, being perceived as older. These studies were really interesting. They would take the same person, they would take a picture of them with a beard, then have them shave, and then take the same picture. And so when viewing the same person, making different facial expressions with and without the beard, they were rated as being older. They were rated as having higher social status, which again I think is due to age. So you're older, you can make more money because you've made it through college or you've succeeded. And then it's also been associated with aggression. So same person making an angry face, whether they're bearded or not, comes off as more aggressive. But it had no association with attraction.
No association with attraction.
And that's a pretty common theme across all the research. Well, because they're viewing the same face with and without a beard. And so if you find someone attractive, you're probably going to find them attractive with a beard.
Yeah.
Interesting.
In the same way.
Well, you always hear that like there's
Charming.
beard people or non-beard people.
And maybe it has something else to do with it. You know, I've talked to my wife who said that she never thought she would ever date someone with facial hair. And we'll be married 11 years this year. So, but also there's like other research that suggests things like, positive relationships have maybe almost nothing to do with physical attraction, but the relationship that you build. And in that case, your beard doesn't matter.
Right, correct. This is so interesting. I would think that whenever those studies are done, it's like, yes, people like beard more.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I'm like, I love a clean face too. So why not? Why would I think that people don't? And you're right, Daniel. I can see how I would think like, yeah, if you're handsome, you're handsome. If you're Yeah, I would think so.
And it makes me think too, especially with things like aggression and age. I used to notice that when I would shave down, I shave down to a goatee versus a full beard. When I worked retail, I would have much less or much more engaging encounters with customers, especially angry customers, than if I had a full beard. They were far less likely to basically give me hell.
Really?
Because I looked older, my age was far less likely to be challenged. I had gotten the "how old are you" a couple of times.
So Daniel,
Mhm.
do you consider yourself a baby face person, like one of those people that are gonna grow old with a baby face without the beard?
I don't know. I haven't seen myself without a beard in almost 20 years.
It's so interesting. Yeah. And
So
then one day you just decided you're like, yeah, I want a beard, and that's it.
yeah, I was in ROTC in high school, and I wasn't allowed to grow a beard because military regulations even apply to junior ROTC. And the reason for that is that you can't actually affix a gas mask if you have a beard, and that's why the military doesn't allow beards. Yeah, I learned that as part of that questioning. Like, look, if I can grow a mustache, why can't I grow a beard? They were like, because the regulations say you can't.
Yeah.
Because a gas mask will not seal around your face.
That makes sense.
Even though you're in JROTC and will never wear a gas mask.
Right.
But that's where it comes from.
Yes, that's where it comes from. And so in that case, and again, that might even change some of the perceptions. We're talking about men in uniform, very prominent individuals.
Right.
We talk about politicians. Rarely, I mean, only recently are we starting to see politicians with beards and facial hair. That it's not.
Story when Ted Cruz grew one.
Yes, and more power to him from bucking the system. Agree or disagree with Ted Cruz?
Yeah, because also like there is this, you have to shave your face like every
day.
Yes, because if not,
every
you
day.
are looking like dirty and not careless,
Careless,
right?
yeah.
And to be completely honest, part of my rationale for growing a beard was that razors are expensive.
Yeah.
And being a poor student and growing up having to fend for myself in undergrad and as a grad student, it was just it's much less expensive just to shave kind of the underside of my neck than to keep my face clean shaven all the time. And yeah, and this goes further. I mean, it ties into research in not clinical, the justice system, where attorneys were advised, and this goes back to like the late 80s, early 90s, reported these Bailey and Rothblatt reported that in this book on how to advise your client that to shave before a trial. And there was no empirical research at this time to show that was effective, but we do have empirical research to show social perception around whether or not you're male or female going in front of a judge, whether or not you're wearing street clothes versus a suit versus prison jumper, or even if you're wearing glasses. So if you're ever going in front of a judge, wear glasses because you are perceived as meeker, more sensitive, more emotional, kinder, and a more good person when you wear glasses.
Wow.
Do you remember Jodi Arias, who killed her Mormon boyfriend in the shower?
No.
I think it was in Las Vegas. No, she was like blonde, bombshell Vegas woman. She gets arrested for stabbing her boyfriend in the shower. She shows up in court with brown hair and glasses.
Oh, wow. I see.
She looked like a librarian.
Right.
I was like, whoa.
The Harvey Weinstein trial was a good example of that, because he would show up to court with his walk. There's video. People caught him walking around on his own, but when he would go into court, he'd have a walker.
Yeah, I saw that.
Perception of him being older, being more fragile. Yes. Yeah. And the same thing, glasses can tie into that.
Right.
That there are ways that you can change which is also, we look at this socially. I mean, if we want to go with the court case, that someone who can post bail, who has the money to post bail, gets to go to their court case not wearing a prison jumpsuit. They get to go to their court case wearing a suit and tie. And that suit and tie can not only mean the guilty or non-guilty verdict, but can also just mean that if they are found guilty, their sentence is less. And there is empirical data to support that.
Wow. Makes total sense though, right?
Yeah.
Right. Now, beyond this, like with beards, there's not a whole lot else. There's a lot in terms of viewing it as higher masculinity or higher like masculine traits, aggressiveness, dominance, strength are associated with beardedness. And again, we can tie that into things like media and various heroic archetypes are typically perceived as being bearded. Being wise typically comes, wizards and deities all have, a lot of them have beards. They're male at least. Beyond this, though, the other real interesting line of research, and I decided to kind of hone in on this because I thought this would maybe be the most interesting for you, Natalia, with your MBA background, is that there's a lot involved in hiring practices, personnel, and business when it comes to beardedness.
Yes, I am sure, for sure. Because I think that just like the hair, right, is one of those the expectations of the look. And go with whatever we're talking about already. And do you look careless? Do you look put together? Do you look responsible? Do you look like somebody that's going to dedicate yourself? Because you're not dedicating to your beer, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Well,
what did the study find?
Yeah. What was it?
Yeah. So there are a lot, and most of them tend to find that beardedness, and I'm guessing this is like a standard beard. So not something that like I'm not going ZZ Top. I'm not, I'm not growing out this really long kind of wizard beard. I have a trimmed beard versus no beard, being clean shaven. They found that facial hair was typically associated with things like expertise and competency, but not aspects of or jobs that were associated with like attraction. So there was this one study that found that photos on LinkedIn accounts made people more likely to associate expertise with like an architect position, but not with like a cashier position or a teller or a customer service position. There were just no differences between the bearded and non-bearded individuals. It didn't help, but it didn't hinder. And it also made me wonder with that one in particular, whether or not the beardedness maybe helped because of something like architecture may be seen as a more traditionally masculine job.
So are we saying that it's more accepted in the architecture world or less accepted?
It was viewed as being more associated with expertise. So they had a...
Okay, then it did in other areas which didn't make the difference. Okay.
Yeah, and the other ones just, it wasn't that it hurt, it didn't help or hurt at all. There was a Brazilian study that was done in 2004 that had undergraduate students view beardedness, and they viewed beardedness associated with age, responsibility, and leftist political ideas.
I can see that.
And then
it's so interesting how it varies so much.
And then in study 2, they actually went to personnel managers and had them rate people, and they found that the personnel managers disliked the beards predominantly because they wanted more. They were the more conservative business owners wanted conformists. They didn't want non-conformists.
Correct. So that's why it might be that my comment came from the negative side. Could be that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I had first started teaching, I was adjuncting, and I was teaching at the same time that I was working weekends. So I teach 4 days a week, and then I'd work Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at Lowe's, the hardware store. And I remember one of my coworkers, when I had mentioned, like I was teaching, asked if I was kind of one of those hippie liberal professors. Because at the time, like now, my hair is getting longer, was getting pretty long. It was at least shoulder length at the time. I had a full beard. My hair's it's getting there. That I had a full beard, and I was like, well, I mean, I'm not a hippie. My hair's getting a little long. I'm not a professor because I'm an adjunct. I'm not tenure track yet. And I was like, at the time, I was like, I'm pretty, I see myself as I was a registered independent at the time. And I was like, so technically I'm not, but there's that, again, that association that like it's, and there were some professors at the university that I was teaching at that, yeah, they fit that bill. They had really, they looked like wizards. They had really long beards. They had long white hair. And they kind of fit that stereotype that may have come off. And there is some research that has looked at perceptions in college professors. There was one, a really early one, in 1976. Klaproth, I'm probably mispronouncing his name. He was a German researcher. Found that between shaved and unshaved, the only thing that really changed was perception of self-control. That students felt that their professors had less self-control when they had a beard.
Less self-control.
And that could be a cultural thing. I mean, but we're also talking about like 1970s Germany, as opposed to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a number of other studies that look at this. The criminal justice, a study that found that when asked to rate a picture, so they drop some pictures on the floor, and you'd have to say, all right, which one of these got mixed up? Which one do you think is the person who's going on trial as an accused rapist versus the person who's the victim of a neck injury? And they were 78% identified the bearded person as the accused perpetrator as opposed to the victim. In a study too on that, 82% of sketches when asked to draw or sketch a criminal offender had that person with a beard. And so that aggressiveness, that again, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning with some of those involuntary celibacy boards, where that view and I remember doing, and we're still working on it, putting together this sexism survey, and I went to all of these subreddits and some of the boards on 4chan and things like that to get sexist comments from these different groups. And I remember going to the subreddit for the men's rights activists and starting to read through some of the comments and going, oh, they're talking about perceptions of aggression. They're talking about judges less willing to give men custody rights because of the social perceptions of men as caregivers and emotional. And there's some research on beardedness that finds that people with beards are less likely to be seen as emotionally responsive. Like, they're tying into those masculine stereotypes. And I'm like, this kind of seems, like stuff that it'd be hard pressed to find someone who wants to fight for equality to kind of disagree with. And then I got to some of the comments a little further down, and it's like, oh, they're there. That like some of the people are kind of going further. So they're going further from arguing, we're viewed aggressively. And I mean, there's research that shows men are more likely to be, convicted and things like that of certain crimes. And beards may not help you in the court of law when it comes to perceptions of being a criminal offender. But taking that social perception a step further and then saying, well, these other people are terrible. And
it's interesting how varied the opinions are then, or the results, because you talked, like, from what I hear, like a lot of sides, it's like it's the positive side, and in a lot of things there's the negative views. So that's really interesting. I can see how, like, liberals or how people that are more, I don't know, how can I say this? I guess the younger people too, like we're saying, that they have less of those, they are less influenced by these social pressures nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about philosophical liberalism and conservatism, it's, do you stick with the status quo or do you change?
Right.
And someone who has more kind of philosophical left views or liberal views might be more willing to kind of buck the system. Wait a second, you're saying, like, why can't you have a beard? Everyone should be able to have whatever facial hair or hairstyle they want. That doesn't change the person. It's almost a very, like, libertarian viewpoint.
Right. That's where I was going with. Yes. I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Did you find anything on mustaches?
Yeah, there was a lot of research that looked at degrees of beardedness. So it would go from mustache to goatee, so clean shaven to mustache to goatee to beardedness. In a lot of cases, those sort of degrees, and some of these are older studies, that the things like degrees of beardedness, in a lot of cases, it didn't have a whole lot of effect on things like attraction, or in some cases, evaluations of applications. But a lot of those too are also done on undergraduate students in like the early 2000s. And that there was a study that found that like bearded versus non-bearded applicants were rated similarly, but there were subtle differences in like who would you pick as a manager.
Because I ask because like they're just intuitively, like if I'm just like falling back on cultural conditioning, I feel like different kinds of mustaches signify different kinds of people, more so than like beard and not beard. Because like you have your like 1970s porn star stash, you have your Hitler mustache,
Your handlebar mustache.
the what?
The handlebar mustache. The
Handlebar
Yeah, the cowboy mustache.
You got your like cowboy long mustache where it's like the goatee, but you just shave off the chin.
Right.
And so those kind of like evoke different archetypes. You have like the pedo mustache, which is just like a tiny little line across.
Oh gosh, what is it called?
Pedo mustache. I'm sure anyone with one of those mustaches listening probably doesn't appreciate me calling it that.
No.
But I feel like that there's a little bit more than just like my own personal like I don't feel like I created these biases on my own.
Right, correct.
Yeah, and a lot of them go back to what we've been talking about. So like when you portray someone in a particular media format or in a movie or on a television show, you know, how do you make them look? And when they make them have, you know, that little mustache, or you know, that kind of the famous like the Snidely Whiplash mustache with the long curled, which is very different than that kind of styled hipster, you know, wispy curled mustache. But how people view that, and this kind of again goes back to what we've talked about in previous chapters. You know, a lot of this has to do with the schemas that we form, the media that we consume, how our parents react to those things. You know, or for some people, what kind of mustache can you grow? Can you grow a mustache that you can do something with versus, you know, that might be a little thinner or, you know, or whatnot. And, you know, that even applies to, because a lot of this research looks very generally, especially in like the workforce. There are so many different types. I wonder that might be why we don't see a lot of research that looks at a lot of these different nuances and degrees of separation between them, because it would be a huge study. You'd have to find all of these different people with all these different types of mustaches and beards and see, you know, try to keep it normalized, standardized, controlled across all.
With computer technology, that's pretty easy right now.
Right. And I mean, this is maybe the next study we need to do.
I was about to say, it sounds like we're planning a study on different kinds of mustaches, beards, and hair length.
And there might be something there. Some of the more recent studies are using a lot of computer technology. There's one on, they did kind of look at not necessarily beardedness, but the shape of faces. They looked at what's called the baby face overgeneralization effect. And so there was this 1983, 1984 study that used police sketches, and then they altered them. So they gave the sketches like bigger eyes, rounder faces, more baby-like qualities to make them look more infantile, and found that people perceived the more baby-like faces as more childlike, and thus perceived them as being more like children. So less honest in certain situations, more truthful in others, more innocent, more carefree. And then they would, you know, use like the regular face or an aged up face, and you would see kind of the reverse of that you would start seeing differences based on how young you looked, essentially. And I mean, we see that in a lot of cases, that people who look younger than they are often stereotyped as not being as serious, or as not being as
Right.
Yeah, I see a lot of that on academic Twitter, is that there are a lot of younger professors, people coming into the field who are younger, who are in their 20s, especially women who are shorter or younger looking, and they're not taken as seriously. They have to fight back more, against arrogant students or other faculty, administration, whatever it may be, because they're not taken as seriously because of their appearance.
Right.
Mhm. I feel like our advisor plays into that a little bit too much.
Right.
Because he goes into classrooms, because he's kind of got a little bit of a baby face and he looks like a student.
Yeah.
And so he goes in on the first day and he sits in the auditorium seating with the students and then just makes them sit there in silence after class has already started. Before someone asks him if the professor's going to be there, and then he's like, "Oh, that's me."
Yeah, I don't know if I could get away with that. I mean, maybe nowadays, once we eventually get back to some kind of normal, I think t-shirt and jeans is going to be my new style.
I'm letting COVID change our dress code.
Yeah, change the perceptions. I mean, I had my advisor when I was working my master's degree, again, ties into social perception. He was a shorts and a t-shirt kind of guy, but we're also in Southern Louisiana, so shorts and a t-shirt is kind of how you need to teach in 100-degree, 100% humidity weather.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Cool. Well, do we have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, there was one article, and I'm trying to find, because I've got it split up into two parts. It looked at glasses, baldness, and beard combination. So all different combinations of wearing glasses with a beard and bald versus hair, glasses, no beard, and looked at a lot of things. This was Hellstrom and Teckel. This is from '94. They found that things like glasses were associated with intellectualism and goodness, baldness tied to idealism. I'm not quite sure what the rationale was off the top of my head. And then beards with unconventionality, and also goodness as well, that it was seen as a more positive trait. Again, that maybe it's a Santa Claus thing, but you have to.
It sounds like a Santa Claus thing.
But also that could be a whole another side point is to talk about things like the color of your hair or your beard, dyeing your hair or your beard.
Oh wow.
Right.
Be a whole nother topic. But he ended by basically, and this quote kind of stuck with me. The whole ending paragraph was great, but it basically said, few people consider that they are making judgments about others, and fewer still realize that they may be wrong about others much of the time. And
Yes.
that was from Cook, 1971. And basically, Cook stated that the subject's face at rest conveys a variety of information, mostly rather superficial, and also makes me think of particular resting face types.
Oh, yeah.
And that the face does convey one essential piece of information, the identity of a person. And that in reality, everything else is a byproduct of, at rest, without any additional information, everything else that we assume about a person is the byproduct of our own thoughts and environment.
Right. So that first milliseconds that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
500 milliseconds to judge someone for the first time.
More about you than them.
Yeah, and it really does. There's another bias to end the podcast on is there's and I'm going to forget the exact name of it now. It's associated with making more self-assumptions about others. So in the absence of any information, we tend to assume people are more like us.
Mm-hmm.
And I will find the name, and that will be the bias for the next podcast.
Huzzah!
So yeah, so just to think about how social perception influences us in a number of ways. I mean, this was just a little bit on hair. We could have gone on hair color, skin color. I mean, a lot of the same research in the criminal justice system also finds that just the shade of your skin has a huge effect on how much you're prototyped into that. And so there's a whole nother giant list of things that we can go to. But I think we're probably pushing well over an hour and a half now. So with that, this is a good concluding point. Thank you again, Natalia, for joining us.
Yes, thank
Thank
you.
you. I'm
So
so
much fun.
happy to be here. here, and I'll be happy to come back. And this was so enjoyable.
Yeah, definitely. We'll find another good topic to get your input on, especially when we were talking to ourselves that, you know, two white guys should not be talking about ethnic hair.
Right. Put me, count me in.
Yeah. So with that, we wish everyone adieu and goodbye.
See ya.
Bye bye.